In a remote village, hidden among silent mountains and valleys, shrouded in thick fog, stands an old house that is never free from spooky stories. The house is located at the end of a narrow road that directly faces an intersection, where the roads meet like knives that stab straight into the heart of the house. The villagers call it the skewer house. According to local beliefs, a house built in such a location will bring bad luck and disaster. The wind that always blows hard in front of the house, as well as the eerie shadows from the dark intersection, add to the haunted atmosphere that envelops the house. No one had lived in the house for years. The walls were covered in moss, the windows were broken, and the front door creaked even when there was no wind. Horrifying stories of previous residents who had tragic accidents or disappeared without a trace made the house shunned by the locals. However, one day, a young family who had just moved from the big city decided to buy the house. They do not believe in superstition and consider the stories circulating as village myths. The family consists of a married couple, Sammy and Reva, along with their only child, Alia. They are very enthusiastic about their new home, even though it looks shabby and needs major renovation. However, they did not care, because the price of the house was very cheap. They saw it as a golden opportunity to start a new, quieter life in the village. On their first night in the house, the atmosphere was already strange. Reva felt something cold and gripping when she entered the house. The damp smell that pierced her nose made her feel uncomfortable. But Sammy calmed his wife down, saying that it was all because the house had been unoccupied for a long time. They decided to immediately clean the house and rest. However, as the night grew late, Reva began to hear strange sounds from upstairs. Sounds like footsteps moving slowly along the hallway. She woke up and realized that her husband was already fast asleep. At first she thought it was just an illusion caused by exhaustion, but the sound grew louder and clearer. There was something upstairs. With her heart beating fast, Reva dared to get up from the bed. She walked slowly towards the stairs. Each step felt heavy, as if something was holding her feet. Her hands shook as she reached for the banister, and every creak of the wood beneath her feet was like a low, horrifying scream. When she reached the top of the stairs, the long hallway before her seemed darker than usual. There was something at the end of the hallway, something that seemed to be moving. Reva squinted, trying to see more clearly. Suddenly, the lights in the house flickered. In an instant, she saw a black shadow standing at the end of the hallway, just a few meters away from her. The shadow looked like a man, tall and thin, but his face could not be seen clearly because of the darkness. Reva was shocked and could not move, her body stiff as if frozen by extreme fear. When she blinked, the shadow disappeared, but the sound of footsteps could still be heard. She ran back to the room, waking Sammy in a panic. "There's someone upstairs, I hear it," she cried in a trembling voice. Sammy, still half conscious, tried to calm his wife. "It might just be the wind or wild animals. This house hasn't been occupied for a long time. There could be mice or birds nesting there," he said. However, Reva could not forget what she saw. That night she could not sleep. The sound of footsteps and shadows kept ringing in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel the presence of something in the house, watching her from the darkness. The following days, the tension increased. Alia, their 7-year-old daughter, began to change her attitude. She often talked to herself in her room, as if someone was with her. When asked, Alia innocently said, "I was playing with a new friend. Her name is Ibu Pucci. She said she used to live here." Double quotes ... Reva felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up every time Alia mentioned Ibu Putu. She tried to ignore all of this, thinking it was just the imagination of a lonely child. But as the days went by, Alia talked more and more to her imaginary figure, and every time Reva entered Alia's room, the air felt colder and damper, as if there was another presence in the room. One night, Alia suddenly fell ill. Her body had a high fever, and she kept talking in her sleep, mentioning the name White Mother. Reva and Sammy took Alia to the local doctor, but strangely, the doctor found no obvious illness. Alia continued to delirious about a woman dressed in white who often appeared in her room. Reva, who was already anxious, began to remember the stories she had heard about the skewer house. It is said that a woman known as Katie used to live in the house with her family. However, one night, there was a huge fire that took the lives of Katie and her child. Their bodies were never found, only charcoal and ash were left behind. He searched every corner of the house, looking for signs of the past. When he reached the attic, behind a pile of dusty old things, he found an old wooden box. Inside the box, there were several family photos and a diary belonging to Katie. In the book, she wrote the story of her tragic life. On the last page, there was a very creepy note. I will never leave this house. They all have to pay for what happened to me. Reva felt goosebumps. She rushed downstairs and showed the diary to Sammy. This is not just a coincidence, Sam. This house is cursed. We have to leave before something bad happens. ... However, before they could make a decision, something terrible happened. That night, as they were getting ready for bed, a loud slamming sound was heard from downstairs. The sound of footsteps echoed throughout the house, getting louder and closer. Then a woman's laughter was heard, soft but creepy, as if it came from the depths of hell. Reva hugged Alia tightly, while Sammy tried to find the source of the sound. However, before he could step out of the room, their bedroom door slammed shut. The light suddenly went out, leaving total darkness in the house. Alia began to cry in fear, while Sammy and Reva could only hold each other. From the corner of the room, a dark shadow slowly appeared, and the figure of a long-haired woman in a dirty white dress began to approach. Her face was pale, her eyes were empty, and her mouth was smiling crookly. The woman stretched out her hand towards Alia while whispering in a hoarse voice, "My child." "Let's go home," Reva screamed. "Don't touch my daughter." She tried to protect Alia, but her body felt like it was frozen by overwhelming fear. Sammy tried to block the woman, but as she approached, the air around her suddenly turned bitterly cold. It was as if there was an invisible force holding her back. Suddenly, there was a rumbling sound from the roof of the house, as if something heavy was moving up there. The roof began to shake, and pieces of wood and dust flew. The ceiling of the house looked like it was about to collapse. Reva closed her eyes, hoping that all of this was just a bad dream. However, when she opened her eyes again, the woman was standing right in front of them. In a shrill voice, the figure said, "You will never leave this house. This is my home. Forever." In a panic, Sammy grabbed the crucifix hanging on the wall and raised it high, hoping to chase the creature away. But the woman only laughed, her laughter booming through the room. "You can't escape your destiny. This house has chosen you," he said in a voice that sounded like a whisper of the cold wind at night. The dim light from outside the room slowly faded, and the temperature of the room continued to drop, making Reva and Sammy's breath look like thin, cold steam. Outside the room, the sound of doors slamming, windows creaking, and the clatter of breaking glass grew louder as a horrifying laugh echoed from wall to wall. It felt as if the house was alive and trying to swallow them whole. In his growing fear, Sammy decided to get his family out of the house no matter what. "We have to go now," he said hoarsely, pulling Reva's hand that was still hugging Alia tightly. With the last of their courage, they ran out of the room, down the stairs quickly. Their footsteps thudded loudly on the cracked wooden floor. Strange sounds followed them, hisses, laughter, and footsteps that weren't their own. Like something was following them, very close but unseen. When they reached the front door, it was slammed shut. Sammy pulled on the handle with all his strength, but the door wouldn't budge, as if some unseen force were holding it back from the outside. They tried to find another way out, maybe a window, but all the windows were sealed shut, and the glass was covered with years of dust and grime. Reva began to cry, her body shaking violently. "We can't get out. We're trapped here." That's when, from the corner of the room, they saw the woman's figure again. This time it was clearer than before. Her white dress now looked tattered. Her skin was pale like a long-buried corpse, and her eyes radiated deep hatred. The figure approached them slowly, with very calm but threatening steps. She reached out her hand again towards Alia. "My child, I have been waiting for you for a long time." Reva pulled Alia behind her, shielding her daughter with her own body. "Don't touch her. She is not your child," she shouted, her voice hoarse and desperate. The horrible laughter sounded again, this time louder, deafening their ears. The woman's figure moved closer, and the air around them grew colder until their bones felt frozen. Suddenly, from behind, there was a loud cracking sound, like something breaking. Sammy turned his head, and he saw the floor in the middle of the living room starting to crack, forming a strange pattern like a symbol or circle that he didn't recognize. From the cracks, a black mist slowly crept out, filling the room with a pungent stench. The mist moved quickly, surrounding them, separating Sammy from Reva and Alia. "Sammy!" Reva screamed, trying to reach her husband, but the thick fog obscured her vision. Sammy felt something pulling her legs down, like invisible hands were gripping her. She struggled to free herself, but her strength was starting to fade. Reva could only see her husband's shadow disappearing into the fog, and then the sound of his last scream echoed inside the house. After that, silence gripped. Sammy disappeared, vanished without a trace. Reva sat on the floor, her body limp, tears streaming down her cheeks. Alia, who was still silent in her arms, now began to cry loudly, calling out for her father, but there was no answer. The house swallowed Sammy, as it had swallowed many souls before. In the midst of despair, Reva realized one thing: she couldn't run away from this house, couldn't save Alia, and couldn't save herself. The creepy laughter sounded again, louder, closer, and the figure of the woman in the white dress reappeared, this time with a cold, haunting smile. Reva knew that nothing could stop what was about to happen. The house had decided their fate from the start. She stared at the woman with eyes filled with fear, but also exhaustion. "Take me, but let Alia go," she whispered, trying to negotiate with the darkness she didn't understand. The figure stopped in front of them, staring blankly at Reva and Alia. The laughter stopped, and a deathly silence filled the room. "This child is mine," he said in a cold voice. He was destined to return long ago. With unexpected speed, the woman's figure reached out, grabbing Alia from Reva's embrace. Reva screamed, trying to defend her child, but the magical power surrounding the woman was too strong. Reva was thrown back, hitting the wall hard, while the woman lifted Nisa into the air. Alia cried, screaming in fear, but there was nothing Reva could do. Her body felt weak, her vision began to blur, and she felt like she was being pulled into endless darkness. The last moments that Reva remembered were the woman's laughter echoing throughout the house, the sound of the door creaking again, and the sound of footsteps moving away, leading her daughter into eternal darkness. The next morning, the house was as quiet as ever. No one had heard what had happened the night before. No one knew the fate of the family. When a neighbor, an elderly man who often passed by the house, saw the front door wide open, he felt something was wrong. He stepped into the cold, empty house. There was no trace of the family. There was only a family photo lying on the living room floor, a photo of Sammy, Reva, and Alia smiling happily, as if nothing had ever happened. However, the old man noticed one disturbing thing. In the corner of the photo, there was a faint shadow of a woman in a white dress standing behind them, her eyes blank, and her smile a smirk. Since then, the skewer house has been abandoned again, more spooky than ever. No one dares to approach, and the story of the missing family has become a new legend that haunts every villager. They know the house is still waiting for its next victim, and whoever lives inside can never leave. That's the end of the story of the skewer house. It's really scary. Always follow our horror stories to get notifications of other new horror stories. Thank you.